So what I want to do here is these guys are all they all lead churches and oversee other churches. In fact, they probably all do that actually. And so I just want to have a conversation with them about how they are engaging with yes, the reconciled church, but also some of the issues that bring this out for us in our world, if you like. And so I'm hoping that this will be helpful. Ollie, you've got the mic. I'm afraid.
I didn't notice.
Yeah, Raj went there. Yeah, Raj. Yeah, Raj sat as far away from me as he could. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to throw out some questions and hopefully we can get something going. I know there'll be many different responses to this question, but I want you to take us back, if you can, to the time when, for you, race reconciliation became more than maybe just a theory, more than just something that was academic, more than something that you just thought about was over there, and it became something for you that you thought, oh, I have to kind of step in here. I have to address this. And I know it might be personal for some, but also it might be that something provoked it for you. And so I'll just throw that out, and it would be good to hear what you guys have to say about that.
No, that's cool. So when I was reflecting on that question, I think it's actually twofold, and it's really helpful, Owen, what you talked through just historically changes. So I think I mentioned earlier, I grew up in New Addington, in just outside Croydon, so in a council estate on the edge of Croydon that's there. And growing up, so 1997, I was a bunch of Ghanaians in the church. So, grew up with a lot of puff and different jolloffs and things that we were given. And a bloke from the National Front turned up to church on a Boxing Day morning. He was in a rugby kit and he had blood all over his top because his wife had smashed his head in the night. Because he's a violent man, and he walks into a church full of Ghanaians and he turned up with his head bleeding, and she'd been angry. She just had enough of him. He was an angry South London, National Front following bloke. And I'm, 15 at the time, and I remember seeing that. And I think it was that stark reality. So even when you asked the question, I was like, when did that begin? I think seeing that and that walking in, and then a bunch of women who would have known who he was on this estate. He wasn't a very nice man. Just love him. And then he got baptized in that church. He got married in that church, the woman who smacked him over the head with a hammer. He was part of that church for many, many years. The saddest thing, I guess, in those stories is that actually what he then did is he wanted to get off the estate. So he left. He wanted to move to Lincolnshire and, get into the countryside and go farming because he was so embarrassed of the life that he had. But yeah, 5 or 6 years. And so I think when you first asked that question, I was like, oh, when did it feel real, not just a theory? That was it. I think as a church leader, actually you met Boss a second ago, came forward. Again, I feel like it's one of those fridge magnets, or when I worked in school, used to like it if you could get badges on the bottom of your school-headed paper about the different accreditations that you got from organisations. Wouldn't it be lovely to have the Reconciled Church, badge on the bottom of your letter? But the work that goes into that is hard. It's lovely to have the label, but how much more it is than it just being a sticker and something that's true. And so when Boss started walking through into eldership in team with me, and we've been friends for a number of years, I started talking about him at our church at King's, and he said, no, I've experienced, racism in this church. That's when, again, it becomes real. And you're like, okay. And that's just honesty and reality and how we would experience it amongst people that we think, what? Our church isn't racist. Our church would never respond like that. And for him to be able to share that and say it is like, oh, this isn't just a theory or an idea. This is real. So, okay?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been great just getting to know Boss as well, watching that relationship. And I've realised in a lot of contexts, there is a relationship like that actually compels you forward, propels you. And it's good. So, Joseph.
So one afternoon we are sat in my my then pastor's house, white British from Bristol, loved the Lord, leading a diverse church, amazing church, a lot of emphasis on one new man in Christ. And I'm in love with his daughter. We've been doing youth work for a long time. We've been dating for some time. I had already prayed before I met this girl that I didn't want to do this long relationship until before I get married. I just want to get married quickly. You love the Lord, you love me, let's do this type of thing. But anyway, we've been doing this for a long time. She's like into me, I'm into her. And then it's trying to get a little bit, and I'm like, okay, look, let's get married. Let's make this thing a serious thing before we make any silly mistakes. But every time that conversation goes to making it a proper thing, she'll back away. And then I'll be like, okay, fine. If you don't want to do this, let's leave this. And then when I walk away, she's crying like, no, I want you. And I'm like, what? Make up your mind. Anyway, this went on for about 3 years. So on this particular day, I know, 3 years. On this particular day, we are sat in the pastor's house. We're in the kitchen. We're talking. And I'm going to call her Emily. It's not her real name. Emily says, Joseph, I think I know what the problem is. I do. I think the reason why I find it difficult to commit to move this on is because I think I'm better than you. So I burst out laughing. Yeah, all right. What do you mean? What? Because you're a social worker? Because you lead? She was one of our worship leaders. You lead worship better than me because you are an amazing singer. What is it? In what thing are you better than me in that makes you struggle with this? That's where my mind is. No, Joseph, you don't understand. I think I'm better than you because I'm white. You're saying, oh, I still don't get it. I burst out laughing. I'm like, and then her younger sister is on the other side of the kitchen. I call her, again, this is not her real name. Sarah, come and listen to this foolishness your sister is just telling me. This is just so crazy. I'm still laughing. Come on, Sarah. And Sarah is not laughing with me. Sarah goes quiet, puts her head down. Then I turn over to Emily, and she's gone bright red. And then obviously I stop laughing. Oh, you're being serious. You genuinely believe that you're better than me because you're white. And that was a concept that I had never considered for it to be a real thing. I've laughed at it when I was growing up in school when people have done some crazy stuff. But for the first time, I thought, you're a spirit-filled woman. You lead our worship. And when you lead worship, the presence of God comes. You've known we're preaching one new man in Christ. We're a diverse church. Like, what? So I was like flabbergasted. I was shocked to my core. But the response, I told you her father was leading the church at the time. The response when I told Dad was like, he was not surprised as I was, like, what's going on here? And then I suppose I just add this to it. So I was the youth pastor at the time, became an elder, became the associate pastor in the ranking of becoming the next pastor. So we're talking about transition. And the second thing, Owen, was this. So we're talking like the church is pretty diverse. One of the things I love about it, it had the fire, it has the theology. I mean, the first time I visited that church was because Terry Virgo was coming to preach. It was amazing. So we're having discussions about transition, about me becoming pastor. And then we find ourselves having conversations like this. When a black person becomes the lead pastor, the white people leave and more black people come, and it becomes a black church. And we don't want our church to become a black church. So what are we going to do about this? Maybe we will have a white figurehead. So you be the leader. You do the work as a leader and everything, but we'll have a white figurehead so that the white people will stay and we can go forward like that. That is probably when it became a reality to me, that this is like deep, core stuff that needed to be grappled with.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. Thanks. Follow that, James.
That's why you sat on the end, right? Wowzers. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. I'm James. I lead New Community Church. We are multi-site over in Eltham and in Sidcup, not so far away. Also involved in new ground. Answering that question, I think my story is different in many ways. My wife grew up in Pakistan. I grew up in Bradford. Multicultural, multiracial stuff was just part and parcel in many ways of our lives. Han used to be in minority culture, obviously. That was what she spent her childhood into teen years like. And so we arrived after we met at university, arrived in London, did a thing called Teach First, could have been put anywhere. And I got put at a school called Crownwood School in Eltham, which was where the killers of Stephen Lawrence went. And so we then tried to find a church nearby, not from a New Frontiers context whatsoever. In the end, tried the church that met in the school I taught in, which at the time was New Community. And instantly just loved this church. This felt at home. But the thing that felt a bit weird is it was just full of white people. You could count on one hand the number of non-white people. So for us personally, that was just a slightly odd dynamic because it was just something that we'd not been used to our lives, apart from 3 years in Durham University, which is quite white and quite posh. I'd been fairly used to diverse contexts. It was just part and parcel of it. And so church life came a little bit like, we say we're a church for nations, but there's not many nations here and all of those kind of things. It was always something that was over there rather than in and amongst. And I guess I had no desire or ambition whatsoever to be in church ministry. That was just kind of God's sense of humor, really. And I ended up meeting you as you, the youth leader, doing your stuff. I was the youth leader doing my stuff. So I met Chris. He was the youth leader doing his stuff here and all that kind of stuff. Momentum back in the days in here and Thornton Heath and in Sidcup and other places. And so really, I guess there'd been that sense of the personal thing of, okay, and now in this setting that this is just not what we're used to, why not? But then realizing actually needed to go deeper than that. And for me, really, having studied theology, that was my kind of background, and then becoming into church leadership and stuff, it was theological convictions that actually brought me to the place. There's something isn't quite right here. I don't quite know what it is. Oh, it's that everybody's white and of a certain demographic, and I'm not sure I like it. Why does that matter? And that's where it came for me, is deep theological stuff. And truthfully, for me, I became an elder in 2010 and preached for the first time on the issue of race and racism around that sort of time, 2010, 11, something like that, which people left our church and I did it. I think a whole bunch of people were like, what are you doing? Why are you talking about this? That kind of thing. And to be clear, a whole load of other people, I'm glad you're talking about this kind of stuff. And so long before big events that took place, although obviously Eltham is a funny place with a weird history and weird undercurrent, and yet now increasingly a multicultural place. And as London has spread, I mean, even places like Sidcup these days can tell how old somebody is by where is Sidcup? It's in Kent if you're of a certain generation. If you're younger, we're in London, and there's a diversity that has grown as the demographics have grown. But actually, for me, the real journey has been a theological conviction of two things, really. The Ephesians 2 stuff of this is not a separate thing, this is a gospel thing. Reconciliation is a gospel thing, and it has to be. It's part of the gospel. It's not a separate, it's not an addition. And the picture in Revelation of every tribe and every tongue, and this theological conviction that that's where we're heading. And so right now we're supposed to be a prophetic statement of what's to come. And those two things have shaped, therefore, my leadership. And as a result of that, the one couple that was in the church who were not white when we first joined, still in the church now, some of our closest friends, we're now sort of 40, 50 different nations in our church, and church is pretty diverse now by every metric. And a lot of that has been because of this kind of deep conviction stuff that we've preached into this and addressed this stuff. So when things like George Floyd happened and other things, we were not one of those churches, and I don't say this with any level of pride, it's just the fact. We were not one of those white majority culture churches, because even though we're incredibly diverse, still white majority culture and still trying to go on our journey. We were not suddenly scrabbling around thinking we need to respond to this. In many ways, in a very, it sounds weird almost to say this, this just gave strength to everything we had been saying. It was a kind of, and here's why, guys, kind of stuff. And so that for us has been the journey. So there's not been so much particular events and moments. I don't have any stories like that, although plenty of those kind of, we experience racism in this church kind of story and needing to address that. But deep theological convictions have been the thing that's then the outworking, and the journey has been delightfully bumpy as we've gone.
Yeah, okay, thank you, James.
Durham University, very posh.
I was the least posh person.
So I was brought up in an Indian family, and so I think for me that was, we were in an Indian bubble, so we didn't really meet anybody else, and I was probably sheltered from anything like that. My parents weren't. We lived in a pretty racist part of Teesside. My parents had a shop in a difficult part of Teesside. They would often get attacked and all sorts of things. But I'm actually embarrassed talking about it now. Thinking about it, race and things just weren't an issue for me. Didn't register. When I became a Christian 26 years ago now, so a few years on from that, after university, then I kind of came into a church, Jubilee Church that I'm still in now. I was the only person of colour there. And so my next few years were to work out, how do I become a Christian, a white, spirit-filled Christian, without thinking anything bad about that. You know, I have beautiful white brothers and sisters, parents in the Lord who've nurtured me over those years. So it wasn't an issue for me. Next kind of milestone is when our work with asylum seekers and refugees, we have a big open door project, big work with asylum seekers and refugees. Then suddenly, all these guys from persecuted parts of the world, Africa, Middle East, etc., were coming into our homes, and our children were meeting them, and all of that. And then there we suddenly our church started becoming more multi-ethnic, and really, I was kind of relatively new to leadership, and nobody really knew what to do. I'm from up north, so we, this is what you've been experiencing in London is relatively new still in up north. And so we were just kind of assimilating people. Yeah, this is how we do things, and hey, and I was like the go-between, without really knowing it. But what I did do is I got to know these people, because we were eating with them. We were becoming, rather than serving them, they were becoming brothers and sisters in Christ. And their stories were very moving, and, God was in it. The thing that really changed things was the George Floyd thing. And I know a lot of people say that, but it was when he died in the middle of COVID, it really got my attention. I don't know why it got obviously why it got my attention, but other things could have got my attention then. And I think that's when I started picking up with Owen. Approximately that time, you started the Reconciled Church through a thing you did for our family of churches along with Angela. And then just a real conviction. I realized how ignorant I was, particularly of black culture, really ignorant. I also reflected on probably my parents were racist, not in a kind of extreme way, but we never saw black people in Teesside. My parents wouldn't have, and so therefore there was this kind of inherent, not hostility, but ignorant racism, I would say. So that was my upbringing, if you like, and so therefore I needed to read about this and find out more about this. This is the journey kind of. He probably doesn't know the impact in many ways, but little things that I would speak to Owen about, or I'd hear him talk about, or read about in that book, and now in this book coming up, just really got me thinking. And through repentance, faith, it became much more on the table for me. So yeah, that's probably the main things that have really kind of convicted me.
Wow, that's very good, very good. I'm probably going to have time for just to, when I say more questions. I'm going to ask one, and then I'm going to ask this to a couple of you, and then I'm going to ask another one to a couple of you. Okay, so I'm going to ask this question to Raj and to James. Just looking back now over the years, how has your church engagement with race reconciliation evolved? How has it evolved over the last few years, and where it is now compared to where you
I
understand?
mean, obviously, through our work with asylum seekers and refugees, we saw lots of different nations coming into our church. But as I said, it was assimilation rather than really each other changing each other. And now I think we are moving into being much more family. And I think that's the big thing for me. We are becoming family together. And people who are new, that takes a long... I think it's hard to rush that through, but I think the big thing about it is thinking more proactively rather than just letting it happen. So there are things that we do in terms of leadership, involvement, eating plays a big part. Things like that we are being much more proactive about, and actually it's changing the culture of the church in terms of bringing people on that journey, bringing all of us, not just them, not just us, it's not us and them, it's bringing us all on this journey together. And it's, Harvey says, it's complex and confrontational in his book, and it is.
Yeah. James, same question.
Yeah, so as I said a minute ago, we arrived 2005. You could count the number of non-white people on one hand. These days, 40, 50 different nations. We got 4 congregations. At least one of them is majority non-white. The rest of them are pretty diverse too. And our journey really has moved effectively from kind of welcome, if you like, this sort of, we're trying to be a welcoming church. Oh, somebody different. Oh, it's lovely to come on in kind of thing, to listening, to understanding, hang on, and we got these theological convictions, but there's one thing to have these theological convictions and another thing to start moving towards a genuinely multicultural, multiracial kind of church, to then moving from just listening to representation and what does that look like, to move into shared leadership, to move into empowerment, to move into where we are now, which is how do we build this shared culture of what we're about, recognizing and calling some things out as we've gone. Yes, we're in this diverse church, but there's still majority cultures shape this, and they are white majority cultures, and actually more accurately, they are white middle class majority cultures. Big thing at the moment with our white working class, recognizing, okay, that's another, we've got to go on that journey as well now. So I think realizing that welcoming isn't the same as belonging was a big thing at the beginning, early doors, going, but everyone's really friendly, so what's the problem? Kind of, maybe they're not. Yeah. And going on that journey. So that was a few years back, and then asking deeper questions about leadership and culture, communication, and really whose voices were shaping the church.
Yeah.
And that really became a big thing. So we very practically preached into it on a number of occasions, took the church through a whole Race and Grace series a number of years ago, all our small groups, and got people listening, asking questions, and which was wonderful, and just seeing people repenting of stuff, attitudes that they'd long held, in tears, and all of those kind of things on all different sides, which was, and then really has been moving. Is what's changed most is that reconciliation has moved from something that we support, I guess, like, oh, that's good, to actually shaping how we've led. And do lead, and recognizing there's a difference between inclusion and empowerment. And it's about, if we're going to move towards a culture of empowerment, that's about more than permission and encouragement. I think we're often quite high on permission and encouragement. Oh, we said go for it, so why aren't you? Kind of, the first appointment I made and when I started leading the team, the first eldership appointment was a black guy who's still one of the elders, a Nigerian guy. And I naively, I've said this to you before, naively thought, that's glass ceiling smashed, there'll be no problems now. Like, proven, here we go, the first appointment, what a big statement. Like, come on, let's go. And why is that not happening? Like, moving in that kind of thing. So actually moving to this, understanding this thing of empowerment, permission to shape theology in practice, which has all sorts of bumpy things. We've always done prayer this way, and now we're doing prayer this way, and we just broken the church, all those kind of things, and going on that sort of journey and going, yeah, maybe, but that's okay. And the theology kind of just that stuff. And I think for us, a number of years ago now was this thing of, if our minority leaders left tomorrow, would our church culture noticeably change? And if the answer to that is not really, then we've got a culture of inclusion. And if the answer to that is yes, then empowerment is beginning to happen. And that's where the journey that we went on. So super practically, things like we launched a race advisory group, just some different people from across the thing, trusted people that we knew from different cultural backgrounds and stuff, and just said, come and audit everything we're doing. Started with all our kids' ministry, and recognized that there wasn't sufficient diversity in what our kids were seeing in terms of the songs they were singing and the teaching that they had and all this kind of thing. So we made a whole bunch of changes to that. Then we went into our youth ministry and we did that. Then we went into our worship ministry and began to look at that through fresh eyes. And again, from just listening to empowerment and going, okay. So for some of you, and having this real honest conversation with some people, some of you we're gonna take a hit in quality because we're going for the sake of something else.
Yeah.
And actually, we that's all right. And that then feels bumpy when you do, and you're kind of, oh man, this is not great. But it is, because we'll get there, and building that. And so I think things like that, moment we're into small grouping, looking at our small groups and stuff. And then, the last thing we did, well, we've done lots of things, but another example of something we did is, we've always said diversity was a value, but what does that mean? So about 4 years ago, we reshaped all of our values as a church into actions, things that we actually like. So rather than saying evangelism is a value or mission, we said we prioritize the least, the last, and the lost. So what does that look like for you? What's it look like for you? What's it look for you? And the diversity one we rephrased as we make space for different voices, which works itself out in two different ways. So our comms person or our people who are in charge of platform ministry, hosting, anchoring meetings, is there different voices on the stage? Is that being seen publicly? But also in terms of how you think through stuff. So my youth leader, he makes an idea of some decision he wants to do. Who have you spoken to who's not like you? Because if all you've spoken to is 20-something-year-olds like you, then you're just going to have something that suits you, but you need to speak to other people. So what does making space a different voice? So we've just done as many different practical things like that. Sounds amazing. Some of it's good. Some of it's shocking. There's quite a lot of stuff in between as well. Yeah. So that's a bit of our journey where we've got to and what we're doing.
Thank you, James. Thank you. Just very quickly, we're going to move on to a different question. I think those two covered that question quite well. Okay, so slightly shorter answers if possible. I'm going to ask you a different question each. Joseph, for those who are here in some kind of church leadership position in this room, or who want to engage more deeply, but maybe they're a bit nervous, they're not sure where to start, they're not sure what the next step is, what would you say? What would you say to them?
I would probably say it starts with working on yourself to confronting some of the things that you are afraid of. So, for example, when the whole the riot started happening last summer and things like that, I was uncomfortable about addressing that in my church, because we planted a church on an estate in Croydon. So among white working class laborers, blue collar guys, the kind of guys you meet in the pub and you talk, and they're talking raw. Like they sometimes, I don't know whether they forget that I'm black. They're like, and these guys have come, they're taking out jobs. My daughter is here and I can't find a home, all of that sort of stuff. And you are hearing, and I'm shaking his hand like, I understand. I'm praying for you. But in all honesty, what I did was I contacted Owen and obviously the Reconcile group that we're doing. I said, guys, help me think this through. How do I shape this? Because the beauty of it is because I am among them, I do understand their pain. I understand the real fear there. So I'm not going to get up and say something like, oh, why don't you understand? The gospel is this, da 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 da. I want to be able to be pastorally relevant and when I bring the gospel to them. So I've had lots of conversations with Owen and that sort of stuff. So if you are feeling, I know in my head the theology is correct, but I'm really a little bit nervous about how I address it. I would say lean into this. God is creating this for people exactly like you and me to deal with it. One of the things you find most helpful, and I'll leave it with this, is there are some questions that has really challenged me personally. I remember when we first went to Teesside. We've been on this journey for some time, but we've gone to Teesside and Raj is speaking and he said, what matters to you most? Your racial identity or your Christian identity? Simple, basic things like that. Today, my friend of mine has just said, the real question is, how is it possible for a breed of people who are told to love their enemies still have discrimination or racism among them? How is that possible? That kind of stuff. And so you think, man, how I actually answer these questions and live them out. I want to do that. And then you find the support and the help you need to do those things.
Thank you. And so, Ollie, just say a little bit about how, and I'm only asking you, so I'm not making it a big question, but how just connecting to the Reconciled Church has helped you and your church.
Yeah, it's helped. So I started this, I think the church's journey, our church is 38 years old. So our church's journey has been long, innit?
Yeah.
I've been leading in the team there for 6 years. But my journey started with knowing Owen from a distance and then asking to just go and pray in Brixton with him. So I just met him at the station on a Tuesday morning, met him at Brixton Station, and he took me to that tree outside the police station and we prayed about it. And we prayed in the High Street and we prayed in Windrush Square. And I think in those parts, just my heart felt cleave to things that I see him walking through and wanting to learn from a friend. I think then the way that expresses itself in a church is recognizing. So I use a phrase like the fish stinks from the head down. So if the head stinks, the whole of the body stinks. And so I'm like, I want the
That's
church.
That's a phrase you use in the church.
Yeah. A smelly church.
Yeah. That's your church.
That's
phrase.
my church phrase. But yeah, I want the church to smell like this, and I want it to capture some of that heart and essence. And I recognize that I'm a leader, I've got to use my responsibility to lead, but it can't only be about me. And so actually, I think a huge part, and so Owen and Pauline now, I keep trying to get them weekend trips to Eastbourne, to the Sunshine Coast, and get out, come down and smell the fresh air. But actually, I recognize that I want to build connections and friendships broadly across the life of the church. And so I'm just so grateful there's like 7 people from our church today. So, Rich and Emmanuel and Andrew and Alison and Jeanette and Boss that are here, because I want to build wider friendships. Because actually I'm really aware that one person can't do this on their own. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to go and achieve this thing and I'm going to go and do it for the sake of the gospel. And hopefully I get some credit in it as well. It's just long it to be interconnected. And so I just love the fact that Owen and Pauline now know the wider team. And in some sense, I can talk a good game of what something looks like. So easy for me to talk up what it might look like on the ground. I think it only truly reflects that if it's fully embodied into the life of the church. And so don't take my word for it. Talk to people who it's their own experiences in the church. And it's being open, our ears open, not just big statements on bits of paper. So, yeah.
Guys, thank you so much. Thank you for your commitment to this, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Can we just give them a round of applause?